Hi, welcome. In this podcast, we talk B2B marketing and what it takes to know your customer, innovate, and profit. We're glad you made it. This is The Campaign by 97th Floor. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome to The Campaign, a B2B marketing podcast about better knowing your audience, innovating beyond best practice, and converting visitors into customers. The Campaign is a weekly conversation with B2B marketing leaders, and it's designed to fit as much as possible into a 30-minute segment. You can catch The Campaign live on Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern, and you can find past episodes on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and at 97thfloor.com. This week, we're going to be diving into the world of B2B storytelling. At 97th Floor, one of our ethos about great marketing and producing stellar campaigns is putting audience before message before channel. So many times in the digital marketing world, especially, we focus heavily on channel and optimizing for channel and making tweaks and pulling the right levers, pushing the right buttons. However, we found that mindset produces smaller results. Instead of going back to audience, better understanding them, which dovetails nicely with our episode last week with Rick Galan in audience segmentation. And then messaging is another key factor here in producing game-changing marketing. So that's where B2B storytelling comes into play. One of our sales reps pointed out wisely on social media before this podcast that whenever we do pitch, when we're talking to a potential client, we'll pull in all of the competitors and all of their ads. And it's remarkable how often you can take those ads, remove the brands, and you have no idea who they belong to, and they all look the same. So storytelling is a huge factor that a lot of brands in the B2B space especially stand to gain from if they just invest a little bit more into that. So today on the show, we've got a really great guest, Tara Ramroop. She's the director of content marketing at Braze, a leading customer engagement platform and co-founder of Mooney Diaries, a blog, podcast, and live storytelling series about all the quirky stuff that happens on public transit in San Francisco. She firmly believes that the best story wins as a former newspaper journalist and uses it as a guiding principle for delivering B2B content that inspires, engages, and converts. She previously led content and social programs and initiatives at Zendesk, Gap, and Levi Strauss. So with that, welcome to the show, Tara.
Thanks, Pax. How are you? Thanks for having me.
So great. Nice to see you again. I am really excited to have you on. And I just want to say one thing out the gate. I love working with marketers who have worked in journalism.
Me
There's
too.
so many skill sets learned in that field. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I'm so excited to hear your take on B2B storytelling. Maybe let's kick off and let's start broad. And I want to start broad and kind of high level. And then I want to get, by the end of this, super down in the weeds into practical, actionable items people can take away. So starting broad, talk to us about like what storytelling is in the marketing space.
Yeah, basically, like it is a term that gets thrown around a lot. Like I think for good reason. Like we all like stories. We all kind of like to hook ourselves to being a storyteller, and we all are. I think that's definitely true. But from a business point of view, I think that storytelling matters because stories connect. Like people to people, businesses to businesses, businesses to humans in those businesses. And they also inspire, I think is another like word, like connect and inspire are the words that I associate with it. Stories inspire people to do cool or great or better things than what they're doing now, basically. And that can be, your personal circumstance, or it can be about B2B software. I have been doing this for B2B software for a while, and I can assure you that there is an inspiring story to be told there.
I love that. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of storytelling within the B2B space. I'd love to hear your perspective. There's, as I was doing research for this, and Emma behind the scenes does a lot of research too, it is shocking to me how much actual research has been done in the B2B storytelling space. Like there are research papers on this. There was one titled "The Role of Narrative Transportation in the C-Suite in B2B Advertising" by Layla Borders and Illyria Kemp. Um, they say stories told about buyer seller experiences, quote, in B2B advertisements were positively related to decision makers. And it helps them to trust the supplier. It helps them to increase the ability to form a personal connection with the supplier. And it increases the tendency that they become an advocate for the supplier. And what I found fascinating is that most people think of storytelling as this fluffy thing, but
Yeah.
and it has a little impact on the B2B space. But this study showed that those effects, they had it was stronger for C-level decision makers than non-C-level decision makers. So as you go up the chain, storytelling becomes even more important, according to this research. So I'd love to know, like, what's your experience? What are the benefits of storytelling within the B2B space?
I think it's not as obvious that it is a story. I think like even people within B2B, the B2B space are like, oh, well, I mean, unless you're in marketing, are a little bit unsure if story or storytelling is the right word to use there. But I think that it's the best way to describe what we also call the customer journey. Like the customer journey is a story, and in B2B marketing, we talk about the customer journey all the time. And if that journey, as for B2B brands, is often starting, in these very high funnel places, like, marketing spaces that were better known for consumer brands, like digital out of home, bus shelters, bus wraps, like even like Formula One, if you've got all the cash, right? Like B2B companies are showing up in these spaces. And so that suggests to me that this investment, and it's not a small investment, in those higher funnel kind of brand spaces is the desire to engage people in a real life context. And I feel like if you're going to kind of make that investment, then you're kind of starting to really, you're opening a story, and you're not just sort of hard selling into want to buy some software. It's like, let me show you who we are. Let me give you a little bit of some insight into what we believe in, what we do, and then encourage them to kind of take you through. And storytelling, I think, is the way that you move people from the ad to from the content syndicated piece, or to the blog, to the white paper, to the higher value actions further and further down, until they eventually become a warmed up enough lead to have a prepared, interesting, relevant conversation with a sales rep. Because I think that is also a disconnect. Is we hear from sales leaders all the time, like, we're getting tepid leads from marketing. All of these people ended up in my queue. They were definitely not ready to have a conversation. And so I think that storytelling is important there as well, because then what that tells to me is that the story didn't make sense. Like the chapters were out of place, if we think about it in terms of like once upon a time kind of stories.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. A story, once upon a time kind of story. The typical framework is, there's the hero, the hero's journey. There's the climax of that story, the outcome. How does a billboard or a bus wrap, where does that fit in that story? Because you can't tell an entire story, I assume, at least beginning to end, on a bus wrap, or can you?
Right.
Like, how do you think about that?
It depends how big the bus wrap is. No, I'm just kidding. But I kind of think of those. I kind of think of those experiences as like the cover to a book, or like the like blurb that you see when you're kind of shopping for something to read, like, or maybe you weren't shopping for it at all. It's just an ad that you saw as you went about your life, and then there was something about it, the brand, the tagline, the copywriting, the voice that drew you in, and you were like, I wonder what that is. And ideally, these are placed in places where the audience would most likely want to take that action. But I think that's the purpose that serves. Like, that's the cover to the story. If we're gonna pull this metaphor all the way through, Pax. But yeah, that's kind of how I think about those activations as the kind of kickstart to then where, as a content marketing professional, that's kind of where a lot of my work then, like a lot of that gets kind of handed off to me. And there's a lot of exciting engagement work that me and my team can do at that point to like bring you further into the story and keep you reading, essentially.
Hmm, interesting. Um, just practically speaking, again, what do you find to be the most effective in terms of getting someone to that next step? There's, is it intriguing them with something that they then go to Google and search more? Is it something as practical as a QR code, or is it just about increasing brand awareness so that eventually they attach problem with brand and then find that through search or something like that?
I would say it's more of the last one, and the way I describe that is taking an audience focused approach rather than a like content focused approach to the storytelling, because companies always have something to say, right? But I think that this it doesn't do service to the story that is connective or inspiring to lead with yourself. Where you're just like approaching all marketing activations, whether they're content oriented or not, with the feeling that I have something to tell you, and I'm just going to keep saying it to you until you buy something. And I think that that's like a mistake a lot of people make. And I think the solution to that is taking an audience focused approach where, and what I mean by that is like, can you demonstrate that you understand what keeps these people up at night? Like why, how are you suggesting that they partner with you so that they can work better, live better, operate as a leader better. And so I think leading with that and answering that problem comes before any of the outputs. Like another thing that I always say is that content can tend to be like you think about the output first, where you're just like, oh, well, I need a blog post or I need a gated asset. I say it too. I still say it. But it's like what is the rest of that sentence? Like I need a gated asset too. Ideally the end of the sentence isn't because I need people to fill out a lead gen form. Like we do need them to do that. But then the like spirit of the gated asset is I need to demonstrate to these people who then gave me their information that I really understand their pain points and these are the solutions that I am offering and would love to continue that conversation. Like approaching it that way, I think
Mm.
is part and parcel of storytelling and just really kind of making that emotional connection with customers and prospects.
Yeah, I love that. Effectively demonstrating through the marketing that we really understand you
Yeah,
and we
because
know the
marketing,
problems so that we are better suited to solve them.
yeah, marketing isn't effective if you don't do that. And then I feel like a lot, we've all been there where you feel like you're sort of like running into a brick wall, just like, well, why aren't they getting it? Like, why are the leads tepid? Like, why isn't this happening? And what, like for us, right? In some of these like later parts of the deal cycle. And I think a lot of it has to do with, did the customer journey, i.e., did the storyline, did it make sense? Like, what was the customer or prospect kind of taken on the right journey, and was the right content surfaced at the right time that encouraged, inspired them to go that next step with you? Or was it just like a
Yeah.
grabbed them and like dragged them into the car and then drove all the way to the sales cycle, and then everybody involved is just like, I don't know if I like this story.
Right. Right. So I find that storytelling, especially, and let's maybe just focus on the B2B space. Storytelling often takes a back seat to optimizing, tweaking for conversions
Yeah.
in pursuit of growing the bottom line, which I think the pursuit of that goal is worthy, like admirable. However, uh, at the end of the day, we're all people and we understand the world in stories, which is the power of the anecdote. Um, and so investing in B2B storytelling is one of the biggest opportunities for B2B brands to grow. And it seems to be one of the most neglected opportunities for brands to grow. Why do you feel like a lot of B2B companies uh, fall short when it comes to storytelling in their marketing?
I think it's a lot of just legacy behavior, a lot of go with what you know. Like the B2B space has always been like oh, well, we have a company blog, there's a CTA, there's a gated asset, download the gated asset, end up in our sales funnel, let's have a conversation. And that works to a degree. Like I've been in places where that worked for a while. But I think kind of it's not necessarily a scalable approach to encouraging people to simmer in your story, say. So I think that you really engaging people in that in between space is generally a miss, where we have the top of funnel like activities, and we start the story and then we cut to the chase, and then there's that sort of like squishy middle where we could engage them more in our value proposition, in demonstrating that we understand what keeps them up at night. And so I think that spending more time in the middle, really, it's not necessarily the top, it's like that sort of top middle. Like how do you really flesh that out so that people don't feel like they got dragged into the car and like driven to the end at the, and then placed in front of a salesperson.
Yeah. You had mentioned speaking to those audiences and getting to know them better. One thing that we have found at Nice and Floor, we've been experimenting with over the past couple of years, is building audiences instead of based off of the normal things like demographics, their title, I don't know, company size, firmographics, things like that. We've been trying to push more toward behavior and desires and problems that they're facing, and then segmenting audiences based off that. I don't think that's necessarily the perfect solution either, but we find that it helps us get closer to being able to speak to them in a way that compels them to action. I'm wondering, any tips or tricks you have, or how do you think about how do you select and segment those audiences so that you can tell them a story that's going to be more compelling to them?
I think doing a lot of front end, like audience, like TAM, SAM, SOM analysis, for example, like really understanding, because that's how you understand what those pain points are. And it's not really just the pain points. It's just like, who are these buyers? Because they're, B2B buyers. They're often a part of like a buyer group in an enterprise, depending on the size of the company. And they have different concerns. And so I think really doing that analysis at the front end of, what is their role? How do they collaborate with other people within their team and within the business and within the buyer group, I think is a big one. Because, for example, like if you're creating a story, a customer journey for a big retail, enterprise client, and then there's like an IT person there, there's a marketing person there, there's probably like a finance or legal person there. All of those people are representing the same company and like ultimately have the same goal, right? But then the analysis at the front end tells you like, well, like somebody at a legal team in an enterprise retail company is kind of up against these kinds of challenges. And those are different from the person who sits on the marketing team and is evaluating it from a different lens. And so I think really, and this requires, a lot of kind of front end investment and collaboration, which can be the hardest part to telling a story, at this level. But I think that it ends up paying dividends in the end if you have that front end alignment, because then you're all telling the same story toward the same goal, but understanding that there are different people in that audience that you're speaking to. They all showed up to the event, but they're different people with kind of different perspectives and want to get different things out of it. Is how I would think about it. So front end analysis and cross-functional partnership. You're going to need to lean on more than just your team and probably than just your org in order to make this happen.
Let's talk about that. Let's get into kind of brass tacks, because I think a lot of people get frustrated in the marketing world, just everyone talking high level about what is ideal and what is best practice and what we should and shouldn't do.
Stories.
And then people talk about like, what do I actually do? So like, how do we actually do this now? Like, okay, we're bought off on this. What's my step one if I feel like I need to revamp my storytelling?
And it's, as a storyteller at heart, it like pains me to use the word operationalize, but I think like everybody has to operationalize their storytelling when you're doing it. Like you just have to have storytelling operations. And so that involves standing up processes around content creation and campaign creation even if you have to do it in parallel with creating stuff and going to market with it. And I think that this is where a lot of us get stuck, is that we don't have time to stand up the processes and we have to feed the beast. Like we have to go into market with something, and that's fine. Like crawl, walk, run. You'll get to a place where you'll have your process and it like runs like clockwork, and it enables you to create in the most efficient way possible. And then you can tweak that process as you go. Not all of us are there all of the time. I would argue that most of us aren't there right now. But the spirit of standing up those processes, I think, is important. Like I strongly believe in a centralized content team to ensure that a dedicated function is looking after, just from the content perspective on the story, like our content is the story output. I think that helps a lot in being the people who own that process. Like I never thought in a million years I would say I love owning that process, but I actually I actually do. I think that that's an important component of the storytelling success. And another thing that I like to do and I encourage people to do is to advocate for shared tools and processes for planning. This is a rough one. Like it can be really hard to get everyone under the tent and say like we're all using this tool and these sheets and we're doing it in the same way and we're doing it at this time and we'll all do it together, so that the story that we tell externally, the campaign, is going to make sense. And so I think just really, even if it doesn't come true right away, and this is another kind of difficult cross-functional thing to turn around, it's approaching it in that spirit. I think even if you don't get all of the shared tools and templates and processes lined up, approaching it with that spirit of we all have to tell the same story in the same way, and going again back to that front end alignment, that's how you get front end alignment. Because then otherwise it's just we've all been there, right? The mess of Google spreadsheets, and this person's spreadsheet has different columns than that person's spreadsheet, and then that team wasn't read in, and they're not in Asana, but we are. And but yeah, so to brass tacks, I also just kind of, before I start talking about my favorite tools and the way that I like to organize, it doesn't matter what you use. You can use scratch paper and crayon. Like it really doesn't matter, as long as everyone agrees that that's the thing that you're going to use. But it's a tech company. We should not be using scratch paper and crayon. That is not a scalable solution. But I'm a big fan of Asana because I think it could just do a lot to operationalize the storytelling and the content outputs to support that story. We use it. I have used it. I use it now for intake, via a form, for like triage, for our editorial calendar, for collaboration with our other marketing teammates, and then honestly for keeping myself on track. Like it's very clear when something is stuck, and I admittedly need that kind of reminder. So the editorial calendar in Asana is basically the story in operational format. Like if you open it and you look at it and you're like, blog post, guide, and then there's like a report coming out about the trends. And then I feel like when I can see it in that view, it tells me what the story is just from that cut of the outputs. So plus one to Asana. Google Suite, I'm a big Google Suite person. I've been in environments where Docs and Sheets and Drive was the norm. But I would also like to highlight the importance of a DAM, like a digital asset management system, like a binder, where I've seen a lot of instances where Google Drive has to operate like a DAM, and it can just be really difficult to enable people with, your docs and your ideas and to collaborate. Like it becomes more of a like storehouse than a place that's kind of intuitive to like grab and take what you need. So a little bit of a plug for that, and also just an internal enablement and amplification tool, like an intranet, a Confluence, a HighSpot, because internal enablement on the story, I think, is just another way to just make sure everybody is saying the same thing in the same way. And of course, metrics. I dig into GA4, and try not to lose my mind, but I dig into GA4 and Tableau, which I'm also fairly new to, because I think that those pulse points tell you what's happening. Like, is your story landing? Like, is it these outputs? Is it the story? Does the narrative actually not make sense? And I think finding the time to pause and ask those questions with cross-functional teammates is the way that your story operation serves the business. Because then it's not just this sort of floaty thing of like, oh, people like stories, let's just call it a story. Like, this is how I think all teams, content team, but not limited to content team, from my perspective, are held accountable for the storytelling. And it sounds a little bit like gnarly to say to be held accountable for the storytelling when I opened with connection and inspiration, but it like you have to hold both of these at the same time.
I love that. And I want to dive into that actually. So we're going from this high level, touchy feely storytelling. We want to connect with you. And then we need to get, at some point, we need to get to bottom line and conversions. And right now, it's difficult for a lot of marketers. We're talking to lots of different people about it's difficult to get buy-in, and every action needs to be very closely tied to ROI. And I'm sure there's a lot of marketers listening right now that are thinking, this sounds great. I want to do this. No way am I going to get buy-in enough to spend months learning about this audience, to get the software to enable this, to build a whole thing that may take 6 months, 12 months to start showing value. What would you say to that person? How would you build that in those circumstances?
I think just getting scrappy, as like I said, I'd be very surprised if people are enabled at that level with budget, with resources, with buy-in, but I think really just taking stock of what is moving the needle and doing more of it, because you can look in GA4, you could look in Tableau, and you can see how many people downloaded a report, or you can see kind of how well, like, your top what you believe your top 5 assets were for lead gen, say, and then you could just sort of use that as a small sample size and then just say, you know what, I don't have the 360 view yet, but based on this slice, I think that this is the kind of formula for gated assets. And then going in GA and looking at like blog performance, how are people consuming this content? Did they click on it in an email? Did they click on it from, was it direct traffic? Was it organic? And then just really kind of, even at the highest level, starting to diagnose, how did people enter your ecosystem? And again, it's going to be difficult to get that 360 view, but a pastiche of the view is I think directionally enough to kind of get into that habit of making more data informed decisions. So it's not just like throwing storytelling spaghetti at the wall. Like, you're actually kind of identifying, like, okay, well, we built out this journey, this story. Let's see if it makes sense. Does it float?
Oh no, I think we lost Tara. Oh, okay. Tara's internet looks like it got cut out. That's okay. We're going to keep going. I did actually want to talk. Oh,
Here I
she's
am.
back. Hey, you're back.
Sorry.
Awesome.
But
Oh, you're good.
the internet does this thing when I'm like, I have to talk and have something intelligent to say, and it's just like, you know what, it's Friday though.
Yeah, you're right on
Apologies.
a great point about getting buy off and getting scrappy.
Yeah.
Right. I love that. Something I've talked a lot about with my marketers here at Nice and Floor is closing that feedback loop.
Yeah.
It's impossible to grow and get better if you don't have a solid and reliable feedback loop, especially one that's frequent. And so, as an agency, we're often on the outside, often when it comes to post sale or post lead and sale and all that. And so, I'm always pushing my team to get as much data post lead as possible so we can really understand what's happening with these leads. Is the messaging hitting home, like closing that feedback loop? And so I love that. And to wrap up here, I want to end with some of my takeaways and see if there's any final thoughts from you, Tara. so some takeaways that I've got on our end here is number one, operationalize your storytelling. Two very different words that often never go together, but they both need each other to be successful.
That'll be my
Number
brand
two,
now,
build as you
is
go.
that
Don't wait.
oxymoron.
Yeah. Operationalize storytelling. I love it. Number two, build as you go. Don't wait to get all the investment. You're not going to get the perfect setup, but just you need to go and build that story as you go. And oftentimes, in my experiences, you learn more about that story as you build.
You too.
And then finally, utilize your analytics, analyze that story as you go, get the data in to create that strong feedback loop as you're kind of building out your scrappy storytelling plan. Any other final thoughts on B2B storytelling that you think the audience needs to know, Tara?
Just, listen carefully, make connections between everything you hear in meetings, things that you see on social, and we're all actively telling the company story, whether we want to or not. And, ultimately we all want to make sure that we all like what we hear, internally, which is the best way to identify whether people outside of the tent will care and be inspired to connect with us.
I love that. Listen carefully, make connections, listen to what you hear internally, and use all of that information to build that story. That's awesome. Tara, thank you so much for joining us today. What would you like to send people to? How can they find you? What would you like to send them to?
I am munidiaries.com is my pet project that I feel like was the center of my storytelling experience after my experience as a journalist. It is still alive, and it has been going strong for going on 17 years actually. And so I think if anybody kind of wants to understand my philosophy around storytelling, I would love for people to just kind of check out some weird stories about stuff that happens on the bus. Nice stuff too. People meet their spouses and everything, but that would be my little plug, and probably the best way to find me. And it's probably the thing that shows up when you Google me. So see you there.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sounds great. We'll get a link in our show notes too. Thank you everybody for
Nice.
joining today. Tune in for next week, same time, same day on Friday. Until then, take care. Have a
Thanks,
great weekend.
Pax.
Thanks for listening. The campaign is produced by 97th Floor, a 20-year-old marketing agency that helps companies like McKinsey, Pluralsight, and Checkpoint know their customers, execute innovative campaigns, and drive profitable growth. If you have an allocated growth budget and product market fit, we'd love to do research and build a proposal for you. Visit us at 97thfloor.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe. See you next time.